Money has a way of revealing the truths people spend years trying to hide. I learned this at 22 years old, standing outside my father's study with my hand on the door frame, learning in the space of 40 seconds that the life I thought I was living had a different version running underneath it the entire time. My name is Sarah Thompson. I grew up in the kind of house that looked from the outside like proof that things had worked out. 4 bedrooms, a lawn that got mowed on schedule. A father who wore good suits to work and gave firm handshakes to people who mattered. A mother who kept the house immaculate and the peace even more immaculate because peace in our family was the surface tension on water that everyone pretended was solid ground. And 2 daughters, Emily the elder, me the other one. In our family, those 2 descriptions carried very different weights. Emily was the golden child in the way that golden children always are, not necessarily more talented, not necessarily more deserving, but more visible. More celebrated, the one the family pointed to when they needed evidence that they had done something right. She was beautiful in the polished, deliberate way of someone who had always been told she was beautiful. She was confident in the particular way of someone who had never been given a reason not to be. She had plans, law school, a prestigious firm, a career that would confirm everything our parents had always believed about her. And she had our parents' full attention, their full investment, their full belief, which meant I had whatever was left over. I want to be honest about something before I go further. I don't think my parents were villains. I don't think they sat in a room one day and decided to love Emily more. I don't think they made a conscious choice to diminish me. I think they just defaulted. They defaulted to the child who fitted most easily into the story they were already telling about themselves. The daughter who confirmed their vision of what success looked like. The one whose achievements they could translate into the language their friends and colleagues spoke. Emily wanted to be a lawyer. Our father was a businessman who respected lawyers. That sentence practically wrote their relationship for them. I wanted to study business. I wanted to build something. I had been working 2 jobs since I was 16, not from necessity, but from a drive I couldn't fully explain, a need to understand how things worked, how money moved, how an idea became an enterprise. But in my family, that drive was invisible, because it didn't come with the right label on it. The night everything changed, I had come home from a late shift at the grocery store where I'd been working since my junior year of high school. I was 22, I had just received my acceptance to business school. I had not yet told my parents because I had learned through years of careful observation that good news shared at the wrong moment became awkward news, then minimized news, then forgotten news. I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment never came. Instead, I passed my father's study and heard my name, and I stopped. We can't afford both, Linda. Emily's law school has to take priority. Sarah will have to make do with the diner job. I want you to understand something about hearing your own father say those words. It's not the shock that stays with you, it's the absence of shock. Because somewhere in my chest, in a place I had been protecting very carefully for years, I had always known. I had known in the way you know things that haven't been spoken, through patterns, through silences, through the accumulation of 1,000 small moments that each individually could be explained away. The summer Emily went to tennis camp and I worked at a coffee shop. The year Emily's school supplies came from a specialty store and mine came from wherever was cheapest. The conversation at the dinner table that was never about my plans, always about hers. The question that was never asked, "What do you want, Sarah?" In the question that was always asked, "Have you thought about something more practical?" I had known, I had just never heard it said out loud. Emily has real potential. Sarah just needs to be practical. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the door frame, my heart doing something complicated in my chest, my acceptance letter to business school sitting in my bag. Then I turned around. Got my keys, got my jacket, and headed for the front door. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs before I reached it. Perfect, as always, her hair done, her outfit deliberate, her face carrying the particular expression of concern that beautiful people use when they sense something is wrong and haven't yet decided if they want to be involved in it. Mom's making dinner, family night, remember? Family night, I almost laughed. Not feeling well, I said. Wait, she descended the stairs and I could see on her face that she was genuinely worried. Whatever else Emily was, she wasn't entirely without instinct. Is everything okay? You look upset. Everything's fine, I said, just like always. She flinched at my tone. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said. Absolutely nothing, just like my future, apparently. I slammed the door behind me. Halfway down the driveway, my father's voice came from the porch. I turned. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted, authoritative, the posture of a man who had never genuinely questioned whether he was right about anything. My mother and Emily hovered behind him. "Why?" I said before he could speak. "So you can tell me to my face that I'm not worth investing in, that Emily is the only one who deserves a future." His face darkened. "You were eavesdropping. I was walking past a door," I said. "I'm glad I did. For once, I got some honesty." The argument that followed was the argument I had been having with my family for years, just finally spoken aloud. Every accusation landing on both sides, every wound that had been quietly accumulating suddenly visible and bleeding in the front driveway of our family home. "I got better grades than she did," I said at one point. "I worked 2 jobs through high school while she went to tennis camp. I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough." Silence. My mother was crying. Emily looked stricken. My father looked as he almost always looked when it came to me, disappointed. "If that's how you feel," he said finally, "perhaps you should leave until you've calmed down." "Don't worry," I said. "I'm done being practical." I got in my car, drove away, and I didn't look back. If you've ever felt like the second choice in a family that was supposed to love you equally, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. And it started with one envelope, one woman who had been watching for 30 years, and one night that finally made the invisible visible. I drove to Aunt Clara's house because there was nowhere else to go. Not because I had no friends, no options, no other doors I could have knocked on, but because Aunt Clara's house was the one place in my life that had never required me to be anything other than exactly who I was. Her Victorian home sat 2 miles from my parents' house and existed in a completely different world. Warm light in every window, the smell of lavender and old books, furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than appearance. A kitchen that always had something in it because Aunt Clara believed that feeding people was a form of love that required no explanation. She was 70 years old and she was the sharpest person I had ever known. Not sharp in the cutting way, sharp in the seeing way. The way that makes you feel in someone's presence that you are being truly and completely observed, not judged, not evaluated, just seen. All of you, the whole picture. She had always seen me, even when no one else was looking. She opened the door before I could knock. "I know," she said simply and stepped back to let me in. We sat in her study, the room lined with books and the accumulated objects of a long life lived with intention, and I told her what I had heard. She listened without interrupting, without the "I'm sure he didn't mean it that way" that my mother would have offered, without the "you need to understand your father's pressures" that I had heard from relatives at every family gathering for years. She just listened, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the drawer of her desk and took out an envelope. The envelope was thick, heavier than I expected. I looked at her. "I've been waiting for the right moment," she said. "I suppose this is it." Inside was a bank statement, an account in my name, a balance that made my eyes blur, not a small inheritance, not a symbolic gesture. Enough for business school tuition, fully paid. Enough for living expenses while I studied. Enough for the seed money to start something real afterward. Enough to make the diner job, the future my father had so practically planned for me, entirely optional. "I started saving for both you girls when you were born," Aunt Clara said. "Your parents knew about Emily's fund. I kept yours separate. I had a feeling you might need it more." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "I wanted to see if they'd do the right thing on their own," she said. "I should have known better." A knock at the door, my mother. The conversation that followed was not gentle. My mother said, "You can't do this." Aunt Clara said. "I already have," my mother said. "Robert will hear about this." Aunt Clara said, "Good, tell him his sister sees exactly what he's done to both his daughters." My mother left, slamming the door. The house settled into quiet. I sat with the bank statement in my hands and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not vindication. Hope. The particular, fragile, specific hope of a person who has just discovered that someone believed in them when they couldn't quite believe in themselves. "What do I do now?" I asked. Aunt Clara leaned forward. "Whatever you want," she said. "That's the beauty of it." She smiled. "But might I suggest starting with that business degree you've always dreamed about? This is the moment I think about when things get hard." One person who sees you, really sees you, can change the entire trajectory of your life. Not because they do the work for you, but because they confirm at the exact moment you most need confirmation that the work is worth doing. That you are worth doing it for, that the vision you have, the thing you see that other people walk past is real and real in a way that deserves to exist in the world. Aunt Clara was that person for me. She didn't give me a future. She gave me the ground to stand on and the certainty that the growing was mine. Did anyone ever do that for you? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know about the people who water us when no one is watching. I want to know their names. Business school was the first place in my life where I felt like I was running at full speed, not pushing against something, not justifying myself, not editing my ambitions to fit inside someone else's vision of what was reasonable, just running forward at full capacity. I enrolled in September. The campus was 40 minutes from my parents' house and felt like a different country. No one there knew me as the practical daughter, the backup plan, the one who needed to lower her expectations. I was just Sarah, a student with a sharp mind and a work ethic that had been forged through years of being the one who didn't get the easy version. I studied harder than anyone in my cohort, not because I was afraid of failure, because I was hungry in a way that had been building for 22 years and finally had somewhere to go. The academic structure suited me in a way school never had before. Business school taught me what I had been trying to teach myself through instinct and observation for years: the language of finance, the architecture of strategy, the way you read a market and find the gap between what exists and what's needed. I already understood those things intuitively. Now I had the vocabulary. Professor Hendricks, who taught strategic management in my first semester, called on me during the third class and then kept calling on me because, as he told me after class one day, you think 3 steps ahead of the case study. Don't lose that. I didn't lose it. I sharpened it. 3 months in, I got a call from Aunt Clara. I was in the campus library, surrounded by case studies and a half-eaten sandwich when my phone buzzed with her name. "Emily's perfect life is falling apart," she said without preamble. She told me about Mark Johnson, Emily's boyfriend of 2 years, the charming, well-dressed investment firm partner who had made our parents feel like Emily had truly arrived. Arrested that morning, securities fraud, a Ponzi scheme that had cost his clients millions. And Emily, who worked in the firm's legal department, was under investigation for potential involvement. I won't pretend I felt nothing. The part of me that had spent years watching Emily receive everything without question, that part registered something. Not quite satisfaction. More like the hollow, complicated feeling of watching a prediction come true that you had never wanted to make. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Your parents are selling the lake house to cover her legal fees," Aunt Clara said. The lake house? The same one they had refused to consider mortgaging when the subject of my education came up. I stayed quiet. "She's been calling you," Aunt Clara said. "I know. Sometimes people surprise us, Sarah, even the ones who have hurt us." I ended the call, sat in the library looking at the case study open in front of me, a company that had failed because of leadership's inability to see past their own assumptions until it was too late. Emily's name lit up my phone again. I picked up. Her voice was raw, stripped of the polished, deliberate confidence I had spent my whole life hearing. She sounded like someone who had been performing for so long that she had forgotten her own voice and was now, for the first time, using it. "I knew," she said. "I found discrepancies in the paperwork months ago. He told me it was just aggressive strategy, that everyone did it." I wanted to believe him. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who won't be shocked that I failed," she said. Her laugh was short and bitter. "You've been expecting it all along." I thought about that. About the years of watching Emily receive everything with an ease that had always made me quietly furious. And about the fact that ease, I now understood, is not the same as readiness. Emily had been given everything without being tested. I had been given nothing and tested constantly. That difference, in the end, had shaped us into very different people. "The investigators are offering a deal," she said. "If I testify against Mark, they'll grant me immunity, but Mom and Dad keep talking about loyalty." "About standing by him? What is he?" I asked. "A monster in an expensive suit," she said quietly. A pause, just like I was a fraud in designer clothes pretending to be something I'm not. I told her to take the deal. "Burn it down," I said. "Tell them everything. The truth is the only thing that gets you out of this." Will you come with me to the prosecutor's office? I thought about my morning class, my midterm. The proposal I was writing for Professor Hendricks's strategy competition. Tomorrow at 9, I said. I'll be there, not for you, for the truth. I went. I sat beside my sister in a government office that smelled like industrial carpet and bad coffee, and I watched her dismantle the carefully constructed version of herself piece by careful piece. She answered every question, she named every transaction. She didn't protect Mark Johnson, and she didn't protect herself from the consequences of having stayed silent too long. She just told the truth. And watching her do it, watching the golden child, the perfect one, the favorite, sit in that chair and be exactly and painfully human, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, respect. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have gone to that prosecutor's office? I want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. The years that followed were the years I built myself, not dramatically. Not in a single transformational moment. In the slow, cumulative, deeply satisfying way that real things get built, through days that don't feel significant individually but that add up over time into something that couldn't have been predicted from the outside. I graduated first in my cohort. Professor Hendricks shook my hand at the ceremony and said, "Whatever you build, come back and tell me about it. I want to be able to say I taught you." I was 24 years old. I had a business degree. I had Aunt Clara's fund, most of it still intact, because I had been working through school and living carefully and treating every dollar of hers like it was borrowed from the future. I had Emily's cautionary tale. And I had 22 years of being told I was the practical one, which had given me, without anyone intending it, an extraordinarily practical mind. I used all of it. The months between graduation and the first real business milestone were the hardest. Not because of the work was the easy part, the part that made sense, the part that felt like breathing after years of holding your breath. The hard part was the in-between. The period after you've made the decision and before the decision has proven itself. The period where the gap between what you're building and what currently exists is large enough to be frightening if you look at it directly. The period where every rejection and every slow week and every difficult client conversation has the potential to sound in your own head like your father's voice saying, "Sarah just needs to be practical." I heard that voice more than I want to admit. Late nights, mostly. The particular hour between 2 and 3 in the morning when the brain that has been disciplined and focused all day goes soft and lets the doubts in. I developed a practice for those nights. I pulled out a notebook. I wrote down in as much specific detail as I could manage everything I had already built, not projections, evidence, the actual thing. What existed now that hadn't existed before I started, the first client, the first signed contract. The first time a client's results exceeded the projection, I made the evidence undeniable to myself, and then I went back to work. Greg Matthews was the owner of a regional restaurant chain who had given me my first real professional opportunity, a management internship during my second year of business school that had turned into a genuine mentorship. He was 50, direct, and completely uninterested in anything that wasn't useful. The first time I presented a strategic analysis in his conference room, he interrupted me halfway through my third slide. "You already know the answer," he said. "Stop building up to it, start with the conclusion." I stopped, started over, led with the conclusion. He nodded. "That," he said. "Do that." He was not warm the way Aunt Clara was warm. He was useful the way a good tool is useful, precisely, efficiently, with no wasted motion. But he saw me, not the way Aunt Clara saw me, the deep, patient, decades-long seeing of someone who loved me. The professional seeing of someone who recognized capability and had the sense to invest in it. "You're going to do something significant," he said at the end of the internship. "I don't know what yet. But I want to be in the room when you figure it out." He let me use his conference room for my early business planning sessions. He introduced me to his accountant, his lawyer, his commercial real estate contact. He gave me access to the infrastructure of the professional world, the network, the language, the unspoken knowledge of how things actually operated that I had never had access to growing up. Not because my parents couldn't have provided it, because they had never thought to, because providing access requires believing first that the person you're providing it to is worth it. Greg believed it. I spent the next 3 years earning it. The business I built drew on everything I had been doing since I was a child. Not a single dramatic idea, not a eureka moment in a coffee shop, a system, a structure. Built from patterns I had been observing for 22 years without having the language to describe them. I had always noticed the gap. In any room, in any situation, in any business or relationship or conversation, I noticed the space between what was present and what was needed. Between what was being offered and what people actually wanted. Between the story a company told about itself and the story its customers were experiencing. That noticing, which my family had read as impracticality, as dreaminess, as the vague, unfocused quality of a person without real ambition, was, it turned out, the most valuable professional skill I possessed. I built a consulting firm around it, working with small and mid-sized businesses, the kind with genuine products and genuine potential that were invisible because nobody had taught them how to translate what they were into something the world could see and understand. I made them visible. The first year was a marathon run at sprint pace. I was the researcher, the strategist, the writer, the project manager, the accountant, and the person who answered emails at 11 at night when a client was panicking about a deliverable. I was 24 years old and I was running on determination and coffee and the very specific energy of someone who has been told for most of their life that they weren't capable of this and is now daily proving that assessment wrong. The first client was a small bakery chain, 3 locations, good product, terrible positioning, owned by a woman named Rosario who had built the business over 12 years through sheer force of will and had hit a ceiling she couldn't see past. I spent 6 weeks with her, interviewed her customers, analyzed her competition, rebuilt her brand story from the ground up. Then I presented my findings at her kitchen table because she didn't have a conference room. She listened for 40 minutes without speaking. At the end, she said, "I've been doing this wrong for 12 years. You've been doing the product right for 12 years, I said. The story was just invisible. 6 months after we implemented the new strategy, she opened her 4th location. She sent me a basket of pastries with a handwritten note. "You made me see myself the way my customers were already seeing me. I didn't know that was possible." I kept the note. It went on the wall of every office I've had since. The work was difficult in the way all real work is difficult, not flashy difficult, grind difficult. Proposals that came back with silence instead of responses. Clients who didn't follow through on the strategy after paying for it, then blamed the strategy for the absence of results. A business partnership in year 2 that fell apart, a colleague I had trusted, a split that was messy and expensive and took 3 months of revenue and a professional friendship I had genuinely valued. I sat through all of it. Not without pain, not without the occasional 2 a.m. notebook session, but I sat through it. Because I had something sustaining me through every hard moment that I had never had before. The work was mine, not because my parents planned it. Not because it fitted a family narrative of what success was supposed to look like. Not because someone had mapped the path and handed it to me, because I had chosen it, built it, decided every single morning to keep building it. And there is a resilience available only to people building something they genuinely chose. You can endure almost anything when it belongs to you. The year I turned 26, the firm landed its first major client. A regional manufacturing company, 200 employees, 18 years in business. A product that was genuinely excellent and market positioning that was genuinely invisible. They had been losing market share for 3 years to competitors whose products were objectively inferior, and their leadership team could not understand why. I could see it immediately. They were speaking in the language of engineering when their customers were asking questions in the language of outcomes. They were describing what they made instead of what it did for the people using it. We spent 4 months rebuilding their external identity, not their product, not their operations, their story. At the end of the first year, their revenue had grown by 40%. Their CEO sent me a handwritten note. "I've worked with consultants for 30 years. None of them saw what you saw. Whatever you charge next time, charge more." I framed it, hung it on the wall of my office. It was the first external confirmation, the first voice outside Aunt Clara's and Greg's and my own, that what I saw was real, and real in a way that translated into results. I looked at it every morning for 2 years. My parents called occasionally. My father in the tone of a man who has made a prediction and is periodically checking in to see if it's been confirmed, yet cautious, slightly braced, as if prepared for the news that the thing he had always expected would happen had now happened. My mother to relay information about Emily's slow, steady rebuilding, how she was doing at the compliance firm, whether she was talking to anyone, whether I had spoken to her. I was polite, I was brief, I did not share the numbers. Not from bitterness, but because I had learned something important about where you direct your energy, you give it to the things that deserve it. The people who had earned my full attention got my full attention. My family would find out about the rest when it was undeniable, and it was becoming undeniable faster than any of us had expected. I want to stop here, before the success story reaches its peak. Before the confrontations and the evidence and the moment the whole family finally sees. I want to stop here and tell you about the person who made all of it possible, not just the money, the person. Aunt Clara called me every Sunday, not to check on the business, not to ask about numbers or progress or whether I had spoken to my parents. To talk about books she was reading. She always had 3 going simultaneously, one fiction, one history, one something she described as productive irritation, meaning a book she disagreed with enough to find it useful. About the garden she was tending in the backyard of the Victorian house, the hydrangeas she had been coaxing toward a particular shade of blue for years, the apple tree that produced too much fruit in August and required her to learn increasingly creative things to do with apples. About a documentary she had watched that had changed how she thought about something she'd believed for 30 years. About me, about what I was thinking about, what I was wrestling with. What I found beautiful or difficult or surprising that week. She treated my inner life like it was worth attending to. Not my outcomes, not my progress, not my results, my inner life, the texture of my experience. She asked questions like, what did you learn this week that surprised you? And what's the thing you're most afraid of right now, if you're being completely honest? And what's the part of the work that gives you energy versus the part that takes it? Questions that most people, including most people who loved me, never thought to ask. Because those questions require you to believe that the answers matter, that the person's interior experience is worth knowing, that the human being in front of you is more than a collection of outcomes to be evaluated. Aunt Clara always believed that, about me. About Emily in her own way, even as she watched Emily receive everything too easily for too long, about everyone she loved. It was, I came to understand, the deepest form of respect she knew how to show. She came to see my first real office when I signed the lease. The space was on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse downtown, not glamorous, but with good light and solid bones and a rent I could manage in the first year if the clients came in at the pace I was projecting. She walked through it slowly, touching the walls, looking at the windows, standing in the center of the main room and turning slowly the way you turn when you want to take in all of something at once. This is what I saved for, she said. Not to me exactly, to the room, to the 22 years of watching and waiting and quietly preparing. I knew something like this was coming, she said. I just needed to make sure you had the ground under your feet to stand on when it arrived. Why me? I asked. Why not Emily? She turned from the window. Emily had everything she needed already, she said. She had your parents' complete belief, the unconditional kind, the kind that doesn't make you earn it. That's a powerful thing. She paused. But it can also be a weakening thing. When everything comes without cost, you don't always learn what you're made of. She looked at me steadily. You always knew what you were made of because you had to know. No one was telling you. She sat down in the chair I had placed by the window, a second-hand chair I had reupholstered myself on a Sunday afternoon because I wanted the office to have something handmade in it. A gardener doesn't decide what grows, she said. They just make sure the right things have what they need. She smiled at the chair. Nice upholstery. She got sick in the spring of my 27th year, not dramatically. Not in the way of stories where illness arrives like a storm. Gradually. In the way of a woman who has lived well and long and is now entering the final chapter with the same clear-eyed attention she brought to every other chapter. She told me over tea in her kitchen on an afternoon in April, matter-of-factly, without performance. She told me what the doctors had said, what the timeline likely was, what she had decided she wanted to do with the time remaining. She was not afraid. I want to say that again because it matters. She was not afraid. She was, if anything, slightly impatient with the medical bureaucracy and deeply focused on using the time she had in the ways that mattered most to her. I have a list, she said, things I've been meaning to do and have been putting off because I assumed there was more time. She showed me the list. The book she had been writing for 15 years, most of it in notebooks, never assembled into a finished thing. The garden redesign she had been planning in her head for a decade, a trip to Portugal she had always meant to take, conversations she needed to have. "Where am I on the list?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow. "You're not on the list," she said. "The list is for things I've been avoiding. You're not something I've been avoiding." She poured more tea. "You're something I've been doing right all along." I sat with her in the evenings as often as I could in those final months, her kitchen, her study. Sometimes the garden, when the weather allowed. We talked about everything. About my business and the shape I could see it taking over the next 5 years. About my parents, not with bitterness, but with the kind of clear-eyed honesty that becomes possible when you're no longer in the middle of the wound. About Emily and the genuine transformation I was watching from a careful distance. About what it meant to build a life rather than just a career. "The business will outlive you eventually," Aunt Clara said one evening. The garden was dark around us, the lights of the house casting long shadows across the grass. "What matters is what it stands for while you're running it, what it does for people, whether the people inside it feel seen." I thought about my father. About 22 years of not feeling seen, about what that absence had cost and what unexpectedly it had built. "You always made me feel seen," I told her. She reached over and took my hand. Her hand was smaller than I remembered from childhood, the hand of someone who has been working with it for 70 years. "You were always worth seeing," she said simply. We sat in the dark garden until it was cold. Neither of us in a hurry to end it. She finished the book in September. She got the garden redone in October. She went to Portugal in November. I drove her to the airport, and she walked through departures with her small rolling bag and her reading material and the posture of a woman who has earned every inch of the ground she walks on. She came back with photographs and a small ceramic tile she had bought from a street vendor in Lisbon. She gave me the tile. "For the office," she said, "something from somewhere else." It still sits on my desk, blue and white, a bird in flight. Made, the vendor had told her, from clay dug from the riverbank, something taken from the earth and transformed into something beautiful. Aunt Clara had known, buying it, exactly why she was buying it for me. She died on a Tuesday morning in October the following year, peacefully, at home, the garden visible from her bedroom window. I got the call at 7 in the morning. I drove to her house and sat in her kitchen for a long time. The smell of lavender, the worn leather chair, the books, still 3 going simultaneously, 2 of them with bookmarks inserted, one lying face down open to a page she would never finish. I sat there until the light through the kitchen window had moved from morning to midday. And I thought, she watered me when no one else was looking. She believed in the harvest before the seed was even planted. She gave me the ground to stand on, and look what grew. The funeral brought my family back together in the way that funerals do, not warmly, not by choice, but by the unavoidable gravity of loss pressing people back into the same physical space whether or not they've resolved what to do with each other. My parents looked older than I remembered, not just older in the way of years passing. Older in the way of people who have been maintaining something, an image, a narrative, a version of their family that required constant effort to keep upright and have recently had to put it down. The lake house sale had gone through. My father's firm was under external oversight, the restructuring ongoing. The version of the Thompsons they had spent 30 years curating was in the process of becoming something smaller and more honest. Emily arrived separately. She drove herself, practical car, dark coat, hair pulled back simply. She looked different, not worse. Actually better, in the way that people look better when they have stopped performing a version of themselves that never quite fitted. There was something in her face that had been tight for years, a held quality, a careful management of how she was being perceived that had relaxed into something more natural. She had been working at the compliance firm for 3 years now. She told me once, on one of the phone calls that had become a regular thing between us, tentative at first, careful, like 2 people learning each other's languages, that she had finally understood in that work what it felt like to be good at something real. Not good at performing goodness, good at the actual thing. "I never worked hard for anything before," she had said. "Everything came easily, and I thought that meant I was talented. But it just meant I hadn't been tested yet." "What does it feel like now?" I had asked. "Working hard for something." She was quiet for a moment. "Earned," she said finally. "It feels earned." We stood outside Aunt Clara's house after the service. The garden she had redone in that final year was dormant now, late October, the beds mulched and waiting for spring. But the structure of it was visible, the bones of what she had designed, the shape of what would bloom when the season returned. She planned all of this, Emily said. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the garden. I know, I said. Not just the money, all of it, the recordings, the documentation, the way she positioned everything so that when the time came we'd have what we needed. She turned. She was watching us for 30 years and she planned the whole thing. I thought about the Sunday phone calls. The questions about my inner life, the office visit, the Lisbon tile, the way she had said this is what I saved for, like she had been waiting for that moment for decades. She believed we'd both end up here, I said. Standing in her garden trying to figure out what to do next. Emily's voice had a slight wryness in it, something new, something earned. Ready, I said. She believed we'd both be ready. That when the time came for the truth to come out, all of it, we'd be ready to handle it. Emily looked at the dormant garden. Do you think she was right? I thought about the manufacturing company CEO's note. About the firm I had built, about the sister standing beside me who had rebuilt herself from genuinely difficult raw material. Yes, I said, I think she was exactly right. The study, when we finally went through it, told the story Aunt Clara had been assembling for years. Documentation, meticulous and thorough, of everything she had observed. The conversations about my education, recorded, transcribed, dated. The discussions about Emily's fund and the deliberate concealment of mine, documented with a lawyer's precision. Her correspondence about the account structures and the reasons for them. And beneath all of that, something else. Something that explained the particular care she had taken. The reason the documentation was not just comprehensive but legally structured. The reason she had wanted us to have everything we needed. Evidence of financial irregularities at my father's firm that went back more than a decade. Not sloppy, not accidental, deliberate. Emily went through it first because she had the language for it. 3 years of compliance work had made her fluent in exactly this kind of document. When she looked up, her face was still. How long did she know? I asked. Years, Emily said. She was building this file for years. We sat with it for a long time. The afternoon light moved across the floor of Aunt Clara's study while we read and asked questions and read again. Outside, the garden was quiet. Inside, 30 years of family history was reorganizing itself around a set of facts that changed the shape of everything. What followed was not a confrontation scene. I want to be clear about that because the stories we tell about moments like this tend toward drama, the showdown, the revelation, the person finally brought low in front of witnesses. What actually happened was quieter and, in the end, more lasting. My father came forward, not immediately, not without legal counsel and difficult weeks and the particular anguish of a man dismantling the structure of his own long deception. But he came forward, he disclosed, he cooperated. He accepted the consequences. He lost a great deal, but he made the choice to lose it honestly rather than continue losing it in the dark. I remember the Sunday morning 4 weeks into the process when he came to my office, not to strategize, not to manage the situation from the outside, just to sit. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the chair where clients sat, and looked around the room, at the framed note, at the whiteboard covered in strategy maps, at the tile from Lisbon on the corner of my desk. Your aunt was right about you, he said. I waited. I was looking at Emily and I thought I knew what the picture was, he said. And you were right there and I didn't see you. I thought I did. I thought I was seeing you clearly. But I was seeing what I expected to see. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who had built something real once and then lost the thread of what real meant. I'm sorry, Sarah. Not because of all this. He gestured at the documents on the edge of my desk. Because of before, because you deserved better from me and I was too certain of myself to give it to you. The room held the quiet. I know, I said. Not warmly, not coldly, honestly, thank you for saying it. And then we got to work, because that was, in the end, what there was to do, not a dramatic resolution, not a healed wound, a direction. Two people choosing, carefully, to try to be something different to each other than they had been. That is not nothing. In fact, in my experience, that is everything. 22 years of being overlooked. And then, in one quiet office on a Sunday morning, the man who overlooked you finally sees. What would you have said? Tell me in the comments. 6 months after Aunt Clara's funeral, the firm landed the largest engagement we had ever taken on. A national company, 1,500 employees, 22 years in business. A genuinely excellent product that had been losing ground for 4 years because its leadership was too close to it to see the story they were failing to tell. We spent 4 months inside their organization, interviewing customers, analyzing competitors, sitting in on internal meetings and watching the gap between how the leadership talked about the company and how the customers experienced it. At the end, I stood in their boardroom, the same kind of room my father had once stood in, at the head of a table, certain he understood what the picture was, and I presented what we had found. 2 hours, every slide earned. At the end, the CEO, a woman in her 50s who had built the company from 4 employees and who had been watching me throughout the presentation with the focused attention of someone who recognizes the real thing, said, "How did you see that? We've been inside this for 20 years. That's why," I said. "You're inside it, I'm outside it. Outside is where the gap is visible," she nodded slowly. "That's what I'm paying for," she said. "That's exactly what I'm paying for." We implemented the strategy over the following 8 months. At the 1-year mark, their market share had grown by 23%. She sent me a case of wine and a handwritten card that said, "Come back next year, we've got more gaps." I smiled for a long time after reading that, not because of the win. Because of what it confirmed, again, still, always, that the thing I had always been able to see was real, and real in a way that mattered to people, and that the gap between what I saw and what others saw was not a problem to be solved. It was the work itself. Emily became the compliance director at the firm 2 years after that, not because I hired her out of family obligation, not because I thought the family connection would be useful. Because she had become, through 3 years of genuine effort and the particular education of consequence, someone who was very good at the work we needed done. She was careful in a way that had been forged through experience. She was honest in a way that had been earned through the cost of having been dishonest. She was unflinching about what was right because she had spent years watching what the alternative produced. The day she signed the contract, she sat across from me and said, "I know what this looks like from the outside, the CEO's sister getting a senior position. I know what it looks like from the inside too," I said. 3 years of compliance work at a firm that doesn't care about your last name, 2 professional certifications you got by passing exams, a track record that I can read independently of anything I know about you personally. I looked at her. "You earned your way to this door. What you do once you're through it is yours." She straightened in her chair. "I won't waste it," she said. "She hasn't. My parents found their way to something smaller and more honest, not a dramatic transformation. Not a tearful family reunion. Something quieter and, I think, more real. My father called on Sundays now, a schedule that had begun tentatively about 6 months after the Sunday morning office visit, and that had solidified over time into something reliable. Sometimes we talked about the firm, the restructured version, the external oversight, what was being rebuilt. Sometimes we talked about other things. He asked questions he had never asked before, what I was thinking about. What I found difficult about the work I was doing, what I was reading, what I found beautiful. Questions that Aunt Clara would have recognized. Questions that treated my inner life as worth attending to. He didn't ask them perfectly. He occasionally slipped back into old patterns, the slight default to evaluation, the faint tone of measurement underneath the question. But he asked, and he listened to the answers. My mother came to the office once in the 2nd year. She walked through slowly the way Aunt Clara had walked through the first office, touching the walls, looking at the windows, standing in the center of the room and turning. At the end, she stood in front of the framed note from the manufacturing company CEO. She read it, turned to me. "Your aunt would have loved this," she said. "She knew it was coming," I said. My mother smiled, the real one, the one that didn't require management. The one that had been kept carefully protected for most of my childhood because the family required the composed version. "She always did," she said. "The ceramic tile from Lisbon is still on my desk, blue and white, a bird in flight. Riverbank clay transformed. I look at it every day. It reminds me of Aunt Clara in her wide-brimmed hat in a Lisbon street market, selecting exactly this tile because she knew exactly why she was selecting it. It reminds me of riverbanks, of clay, of the fact that the most extraordinary things often start as the most ordinary materials. It reminds me of a garage on a Hartford street with a cracked concrete floor and a buzzing fluorescent bulb. It reminds me that transformation is not a moment. It is a direction, a decision made once and then kept making, every day, in the small choices that don't feel significant individually and add up over time into something that couldn't have been predicted from where you started. What's the thing in your life that started as the most ordinary material and became something extraordinary? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. I'm writing this from the office. Not the first one, the fourth-floor warehouse space with good light and a second-hand chair I reupholstered on a Sunday afternoon. Not the second one, where the manufacturing company CEO's framed note went on the wall and stayed there through 3 years of growth. The third one, floor-to-ceiling windows that face east and fill the space with morning light at exactly the hour when the work is best. A team of 23 people who chose to be here, who came through the door because they believed in what we were building and who stayed because the building kept proving them right. Clients in 11 cities. A track record that speaks loudly enough that I haven't had to raise my voice in years. On my desk sit 3 things. The framed note from the manufacturing company CEO, whatever you charge next time, charge more. The first external confirmation from a stranger that what I saw was real. The photograph of Aunt Clara in her garden taken 2 summers before she died, squinting happily into the afternoon sun, not performing anything, just there, just herself, just exactly as she always was. The ceramic tile from Lisbon, blue and white, a bird in flight made from riverbank clay. 3 things, the evidence of someone else's belief, the origin of my own. A reminder that beautiful things come from the most ordinary sources if someone is paying attention. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 22, standing outside my father's study with my hand on the door frame and my world reorganizing itself around 40 seconds of overheard conversation. The families that underestimate you are not ultimately doing you a disservice. They are doing something more complicated. They are showing you with complete and unambiguous clarity what the work is going to have to be. Because the people who aren't watching, who aren't counting on you, who haven't reserved a place for you in their picture of success, those people create by accident a particular and rare kind of freedom. They free you from performing for them. They free you from building toward their definition. They leave you alone, clear-eyed, with the particular hunger of someone who has been overlooked for long enough to be very serious about what they're building, in a position that is painful and liberating in exact and equal measure. The pain is real. I want to say that clearly because the stories we tell about people who overcame difficult families sometimes smooth over the actual cost of it. The years of being the second choice, the practical one, the backup plan, the daughter whose potential was invisible because it didn't match the template, those years left marks. Marks in the particular way I check and recheck my work, because I internalized early that my work would be evaluated more harshly than someone else's. Marks in the way I have to consciously resist the impulse in difficult moments to believe I was wrong to try. Marks in the complicated relationship I still have with receiving praise, the flinch of disbelief, the delay before I can let it land. Those are real. They don't disappear because the business succeeded. They become things you carry more skillfully, things you understand, things you can name, but alongside those marks, the clarity, the absolutely clean, uncomplicated clarity of knowing that everything I built because I chose it. Not because someone mapped it out, not because I was following a plan someone else designed for me, not because the path of least resistance led me here, because I looked at the gap between what existed and what could exist, and I decided deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost, to build the bridge. That choice is mine in a way that nothing handed to me could ever be. And that ownership, the deep, complete ownership of a life you have genuinely constructed, is worth every single difficult year that preceded it. Aunt Clara used to say, the people who water you when no one is watching are worth more than a whole garden of fair-weather admirers. She was talking about herself, I think. But she was also, in her particular quiet way, talking about me, because I had been watering myself for years before she put that bank statement in my hands. Working 2 jobs through high school not because I had to, but because I needed to know I could. teaching myself the language of business through observation and pattern recognition, and the specific education of watching how the world worked from a position outside the charmed circle. Building quietly in the margins of a family that wasn't watching, a version of myself that didn't need their attention to keep growing. She gave me the ground to stand on. The growing was mine. Both things are true, both things matter. If you are the second choice in your family, the one whose potential was invisible, the one whose dreams got smaller every year to fit inside someone else's definition of reasonable, the one who was told, gently or not so gently, to be practical, I want you to hear this directly. The people who don't see you are not the last word on your value. They are not the measure of what you're capable of. They are people who, for their own reasons, their own fears, their own limitations, their own inability to imagine anything outside the story they had already decided was true, chose not to look. That is a failure of vision, not yours. Their failure of vision does not define the landscape. It defines only what they can see of it. And you can see the whole thing. Your work is not to convince them. Convincing them was never the point. Your work is to build with the full force of what you know and what you see and what you have been quietly becoming in the margins while everyone was paying attention to someone else. To build so clearly and so well and so completely in accordance with who you actually are that the evidence becomes undeniable. Not for them, for you. The clearest proof is always the one you can hold in your own hands. My name is Sarah Thompson. I am 31 years old. I grew up in the family that didn't invest in me. I was the practical daughter, the backup plan, the one who needed to lower her expectations, the one who would make do with the diner job. And I want to tell you, with the full weight of everything I know, everything I have built, every early morning and late night and failed proposal and breakthrough moment and difficult year and magnificent year, I want to tell you. Their doubt was the most useful thing they ever gave me, not because doubt is a gift, but because it is fuel. And I was 22 years old with nowhere to put my energy, no one's expectations to meet, no family narrative to perform inside of, and I used every drop of it. Use yours, build something they couldn't imagine. And then, when the work speaks for itself, when the years of building in the dark have produced something that stands fully in the light, invite them to come see it. Not as a victory, not to say, look what I did despite you, but as an opening, the possibility of being something to each other that you couldn't be before, not because they deserve it, but because you are large enough now to offer it. And because Aunt Clara, who saved for you before you were old enough to know you needed saving, who called every Sunday, who asked about your inner life like it was worth attending to, who stood in your first office and said this is what I saved for, would have wanted you to. The ceramic tile is still on my desk, blue and white, a bird in flight, riverbank clay shaped and fired into something permanent, something that came from the most ordinary source. Transformed by someone who knew how to look at it into something that lasts. My dream, my name, my rules, and not one moment of it wasted, not the diner job I never took. Not the business school acceptance I carried in my bag on the night it all fell apart. Not the Sunday phone calls from a woman who asked about my inner life like it mattered. Not the bank statement in a thick envelope handed across a desk. Not the years of building in the margins while no one was watching. Not the hard months, the 2 a.m. notebooks, the proposals that came back with silence. Not the first client, the first note, the first morning I walked into an office with my name on the door. None of it wasted. Because every single piece of it, including the worst of it, especially the worst of it, was building something. Something that stands now, something that lasts, something made from the most ordinary materials, doubt, hunger, a cracked concrete floor, a woman who called every Sunday, transformed by years of steady attention into something that couldn't have come from anywhere else. My story, my name, my rules built from scratch, the way the best things always are. And if you're building something right now, something nobody else can quite see yet, something that lives in the margins while the spotlight points elsewhere, I want you to know that I see it. That the work you're doing in the dark is the most important work there is. Keep going.